future. Get ready for the ride. We're going down to hell tonight, so strap yourself inside. There's a glaring contradiction in your world that's made of glass. Something small can shatter it and nail you to the past. Roll beneath your wheels the madness that you feel. Oh, you will pay with your life.
Welcome to another edition of the Metal Voice. Jim.
Yes.
The power from down under.
Say it.
It's Daka. AC/DC, going back to review the Bond years. So back in the day, Mr. Bon Scott.
Yeah.
Bubblegum band, the Valentines, going to Fraternity, the Australians' answer to the band. And he's out there getting a little discouraged. Nothing takes off, getting older. His dreams fading away. He can see it in the distance. It's just beyond his grasp.
That's right.
Gets drunk one night. Terrible motorcycle accident. Almost kills himself. In a coma, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And Vince Lovegrove, his former lead vocalist with the Valentines, decides to help him out, gives him a few gigs, driving bands, local bands around to gigs, putting up posters, etc., etc. And who comes along? A little known band called AC/DC. Vince thought they'd be a perfect time for singing. They're having problems with their singer Mark Evans, a little bit on the flamboyant side for the boys in the band. And Bond was driving them around. Bond wanted to audition as the drummer.
As the drummer.
They had other ideas. They liked him as the singer.
A little older than they were, sorry.
So they joked about an old man, an old fart like you won't be able to keep up with us. And he said, I can teach you young guys a thing or two. And rehearsed after a band, one of their concerts. Kind of did a rehearsal jam session, but it was actually an audition, which Bond passed with flying colors.
Yeah.
At which point Bond unfortunately had to go and see his wife.
Yep.
And she gave him an ultimatum: either it's me or the band. To which he very candidly replied, "They're a pretty good band." And the rest is history. So let's go, Jim.
First album with AC/DC.
High Voltage. At the time, a very controversial album cover because they had a cartoon dog urinating on a power station.
It's not the High Voltage that we all know and love. It's the earlier version of High Voltage.
That's right. With the Bond and the band, they brought on Phil Rudd, Mark Evans on bass a little bit later, and produced by the wonderful George Young and Harry Vanda.
Well, I mean, there was actually an even earlier version of the band without Phil Rudd.
That's right.
But then Phil Rudd came into the group,
solidifying the back line. And there's the band we know today. They put out the TNT and High Voltage, like Jimmy said, were the Australian releases, which were combined to form what we know as High Voltage today, which was released worldwide.
So, I mean, your thoughts on the first album, Alex?
First album says it all.
And the first album, I mean the compilation that was released worldwide.
Yeah, I mean, it says it all. First album, Jim, it's all there. It's all there. You got the Bond's vocals, which has been described as two weasels mating. And, you know, but he talks about his life story. You got the rock and roll singer.
Yeah,
you know, he talks about the struggle. Live Wire.
Long Way to the Top, if you want to rock and roll.
Fantastic, and we saw it on many of the subsequent albums, the Double Entendres.
Yes, yes.
With the Jack.
And I gotta say, I mean, if you take away Bond and his lyrics and his voice from the Jack, there really isn't much there, right? Other than just a little bluesy song. He makes the song. I mean,
you know, the Jack, yes, the Jack.
He makes the song.
Yeah, but I mean, you got Angus Young at that time, you know, barely 16 years old. He's out there. He's tearing off these leads. He lived on Smarties and practiced all the time. And again, it's a very powerful album. Long Way to the Top with the bagpipes, which Bond. They assumed Bond knew how to play bagpipes since he was in a Scottish band, a Scottish pipe and drum band. Unfortunately, he was the drummer in that. Never played bagpipes in his life. So he learned. It was a headache playing live. They tried on a few occasions. But who else would put bagpipes, you know,
and
in a
so
rock and roll song?
Makes it so powerful. What a powerful song. In that video there you could actually catch online.
That's right.
Which is fantastic.
So they created quite a wave with that and went on to their second release.
Yes.
dirty deeds done the cheap.
But once again, this was more of a limited release. It wasn't worldwide. It was in the USA and Canada. That was later on.
Building momentum
Yes.
worldwide. They put the album out there. Nobody knew what to do with it. They thought it was a step back.
Yeah.
We'll get to that a little bit later. We'll talk about the North American release, but then they fired.
But from Dirty Deeds, I mean, just that album alone, the tracks, let's say the limited edition distribution album, it had Jailbreak, which was once again released
Right.
a lot later on. It had the
76
song
Jailbreak,
Dirty Deeds.
yeah.
It was a different track listing. But we move forward now. After Dirty Deeds, there was
Let There Be Rock.
And that
that's
was the
Akadaka firing on all cylinders.
Yes,
You can actually hear,
Yeah.
on the opening track, you've got the hum of the amplifiers. Or on the second side, I mean, you got the hum of the amplifiers. One of the leads that during the taping of one of the lead solos or guitar solos from Angus Young, the amp actually caught on fire while he was playing.
And also another note, I mean, during that Bond era, they would tour outside of Australia, but they'd always come back home to record
Right.
their albums. I mean, that was a standard.
Something about Albert Studios that they were couldn't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
They had something that the feel, it wasn't a big studio. There was just something about the sound that they liked, and they kept on using throughout their career until the studio finally closed. So.
And then you had songs like Whole Lotta Rosie, I mean, Let There Be Rock. I mean, these are the staples. These are the classic songs that everybody knows.
Back in the early
lyrics.
Back in the early 80s, Kerrang! Magazine, best riff of all time, voted #1
Yeah.
was Whole Lotta Rosie.
That's right.
Beat out Smoke on the Water, beat out Paranoid. It was Whole Lotta Rosie, #1 riff back in the early 80s.
Yes.
And again, it's all there. You can feel the fire coming off. Problem Child was on that.
Yeah.
Overdose, one of my favorite AC/DC songs. Go Down, Whole Lotta Rosie. It's all there. Things were starting to happen.
That's right.
Which led to probably the album that I struggled the most with over the
Powerage.
years.
Yeah.
Powerage.
Yeah, that's right. Powerage.
And you got the lyrics are great. They, some of the productions, the vocals are a little hard to hear. But it's an album that, gone shooting. It's a different style of album. It took me a long time to really appreciate it.
For me, Alan, Sin City has to be, one of the ultimate tracks.
Yeah,
off this album.
top 10 album tracks.
Even though this whole album was weaker compared to the rest of them, the tracks that stood out the most, like Rock and Roll Damnation, Sin City, and Riff Raff, made up for it. I mean, these are tracks that they were raw and powerful, and that's what this album was. It was very raw and a very powerfully intense album.
Where do you go from here, right? They were saying, we're struggling, the Americans are struggling, North America is struggling with the production.
Yeah.
They think, like I said, Bond vocals, his accent and everything, where do we do? So they released finally the album that everybody wanted. If You Want Blood,
You got it.
You got it. A live album, The Power, voted one of the best live albums of all time.
Yep.
Single album, everybody's releasing doubles. They said, no, we're going to cram this in. Single album, put it on our top songs. It's all there. The live version of the Jack, which differs quite a bit from the LP version. So there's The Power, there's AC/DC just really starting to peak, really starting to take off, and where do you go from there? Album Powerage is a disappointment. What do we do? They try bringing in Eddie Kramer, Jimi Hendrix fame, Kiss fame. Where do we go from there? That was a disaster. So they get Mutt Lange. Takes him to a whole other professional level. Mutt Lange at that time, had Foreigner and went on to do great things with Def Leppard, Shania Twain eventually, the Mutt Lange sound. And that was a struggle. Highway to Hell comes out. For me, that's a new type. George Young and Harry Vanda are no longer producing. We've got a much more slicker Some would say commercial sound. I would not. I would not necessarily agree with that. It's just a progression, I would say.
I agree.
It was a struggle for Bon, and let's be honest, we're talking about the Bon Scott years here today. It was a struggle for him. He got mad at Mutt lots of times. You think you're so good, you can sing it. Of course, Bon was unaware that Mutt Lange is a classically trained singer, so he could nail the Bon, match Bon note for note. So now they're going to the next stage. Now they're one of the heavy hitters in the world. They're headlining now. And where do we go from here? Can he bring it to the next level?
And they did. I mean, Highway to Hell was a hugely successful album. The song itself, a response to Stairway to Heaven, as a kid, we were probably in grade school, right, in elementary school, and Highway to Hell was playing on the radio all the time, and everybody knew that song. And it just, again, like you said, it just brought him to the next. It's a more polished sound, but then again, there's a lot of,
touch too much. You can argue it's a little bit more a commercial, but you can't say it's a commercial with songs like "Walk All Over You," "Beating Around the Bush,"
absolutely.
"If You Want Blood." It's a mature album, especially with the closing track of "Night Prowler." And then Bon's, last recorded words, Shazbot, Nanu Nanu from the Mork and Mindy show, which was popular at the time, Robin Williams. I mean, it's a strong album. I mean, for myself, in the whole entire catalog, it's probably my second favorite album.
They needed to go there, Alan. They needed to go there.
They
needed to go there. They needed to step it up, and they did step it up, and that's the album that they had to make. And in a way, it was a great last album for Bon.
That's right. That's a way to go out. Unfortunately for Bon, he passed away during the pre-recording of Back in Black. He said he never wanted to go until he made it to the top, and I think he didn't quite get there. The next album would have launched him worldwide, as we know. Rumors, I believe the fact that Brian Johnson wrote all the lyrics on Back in Black. There's still some controversy to this day that Bon's lyric notebook disappeared after his death. A lot of that stuff was landed up on Back in Black, which he didn't get credit for. Unfortunately, after a night of heavy drinking, which Bon did a lot. In fact, he was supposed to go to bed early that night and went down to a London pub called the Music Machine and watched a few bands, and went home with an Alison Kidder, friend of a friend, and Bon was just too heavy to get out of the car and try to get him up to his flat. So he left him, Alistair left Bon in the car overnight, which basically he froze to death. He had a high level of alcohol in his system. He could not, he was passed out, basically blacked out, passed out, and he basically froze to death in the car overnight. The temperatures were well below zero, and that was the end of Bon. It was a blow for us all. It was a time when, John Bonham had also died around that period, so it was a bit of a dark period in the 80s. But AC/DC, as we'll see in our next installment, comes back stronger than ever with an album that sold.
But not only that, Back in Black, like you said,
dedication.
It was a dedication. But as Back in Black was being released, the record companies go, "Wait, man, we can cash in on this."
That's right.
And then they re-release in North America and the rest of the world, "Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap," which was a different version or track list.
Remember the little sticker? The original lineup of Bon Scott, Phil Rudd, Mark Evans, they listed, because the AC/DC manager fought tooth and nail. Because you can't release a Bon Scott album now. We've got the momentum happening with Brian Johnson, Back in Black. You're just going to throw confusion out there, and it was quite confusing. The North American release, finally, all those years later, with the Hypnosis cover. It was a terrible cover. A bunch of pictures of various people with their eyes blacked out. The original one that was released had Bon. It was a caricature of Bon with a big muscle and Angus, and they're in a bar playing pool, and it was much more of a tooth and a much funnier album cover.
But I remember, Alan, walking into stores and I would see Back in Black everywhere, right? But right next to Back in Black was Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. And the radio was constantly rotating both albums. You would hear Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, then you would hear Back in Black, and vice versa. Like, on and on and on. That was what FM radio was. It was massive.
And there were two different styles, right? I mean, you get the pummeling guitar and the productions, and now they're a well-oiled machine on Back in Black. And you go back to Dirty Deeds, which is essentially their second release worldwide. You know, you got a beautiful, one of my favorite AC/DC songs, and one of my favorite Angus solos of all time on Ride On.
Yeah.
And then Bond singing, that's a great track, and it just takes you back to an earlier, maybe a more innocent band that's willing to try different things, that's willing to didn't really have any, you know, their identity was developing. So and the track sequencing is different again there, you know. In the early the original Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, you had Ain't No Fun Waiting Around to Be a Millionaire, again about Bond's struggles, his life stories, and you know what we love about Bond, I mean, there's very few characters like Joe Cocker. Country and Western had George Jones. I think rock and roll had Bon Scott, because you knew every word that he sang, he lived and breathed.
That's
everywhere.
right.
When he said he'd been drinking, we know he'd been drinking. We know when he was with a girl the night before. We all know that. He's probably with 3 girls the night before.
He was honest. He was honest. He really dug deep in regards to lyrics. Their lyrics were colorful.
But always with a sense of humor.
Always with a sense of humor.
That's why, you know,
a snickering,
leering,
devil-like,
devil-may-care, glint in the eye, a little wink-wink just between me and you. You really know what this song's about.
And of course, Brian Johnson, great singer. He recorded some great albums, but they were different. Bon Scott was a persona, this huge persona on stage, again with the colorful lyrics, and his voice can go from the intense rock and roll to the gentle Ride On.
So there we go, that's the AC/DC Bon Scott year.